Hey guys, I'm Jamie Ivy, and I am here with a friend of mine, a pastor all the way from Rwanda. And we're going to have a really great conversation about forgiveness and reconciliation. And it's all based around a conversation and a story, really, that's super personal to you. So I would like for you to start just by introducing yourself to our audience.
I'm Pastor Charles Mugisha. I'm the founder and president of Africa New Life Ministries. I'm really glad to be with you here today.
I am so excited that you're here too, Pastor Charles. So I need to let everyone know I've been to your church, I've been to your school, I've been to your country, and it gives me so much joy to bring the conversation we're about to have to all of the ladies who are watching this breakout today. So let's start at the very beginning, all right? We want to talk about something that happened in your home country of Rwanda in the 90s. So if people don't know, there was a massive genocide. So would you give us the big picture of what happened in 1994 in Rwanda? And then we'll go back and forward and all the things.
Now, in 1994, in the nation of Rwanda, we experienced the worst genocide possibly ever on the continent of Africa, when nearly 1 million people were killed in 100 days.
It's unfathomable.
It's the genocide against the Tutsi people of Rwanda. It's terrible.
It's terrible, terrible. So in 1994, when this happened, a lot of our people who are watching Charles might not even have been born then. And so this was tragic for your home country. Tell us about where you were and what you were doing in 1994.
1994, I was a refugee.
Yes.
1994, I was around 26 years of age. And for your information, I'd spent nearly 26 years of my life in war, running from one place to another place and to another place. So imagine the first 26 years of your life, living from one place to another place as a refugee, running for your life, trying to get in all the process of development as a child, but at the same time, you're a refugee and you're running for your life.
And your family was seeking refuge. Were you in Uganda at the time?
My family has sought refugee in Uganda. My family left Rwanda in 1959. And in 1959, that's when the first part of the genocide really against the Tutsi people of Rwanda happened. And the burning of homes, the killing of people began in Nyamagabe, place called Gikongolo, in the southern part of Rwanda. Much of it really began in the community where my mom and my dad were living, in Gikongolo.
Okay, let's give some context for our viewers. You've said the Tutsi people. Can you give some context for just when the genocide happened? Who were the people that were involved in this? And give us a little context for that.
That's a new struggle we have now in Rwanda that before the genocide, we used to talk about Hutu people, Tutsi people, and that has come to an end because of the reconciliation that has taken place. And as a nation, we've moved away from pointing fingers to any ethnic group.
But so everyone can understand, before the genocide, you would call people by their ethnic groups, right?
Yes, you'd call people by the ethnic group. And bad leadership capitalized on the ethnic backgrounds in search for really control.
Yeah.
And we've moved away so much from that today, from the whole idea of pointing to different ethnic groups. But this genocide was planned by the terrible leadership that existed in Rwanda for generations, all the way from the colonial days to the First Republic, and all the way to 1994.
Yes, so when you kind of had this like climax of what had been going on for years.
It was building up for years.
Yeah.
I mean, it was started in 1959. My family, my dad had lost his father and mother. And as a younger man, around age 19, he started his journey of running away from death
Wow.
for like the next 40 plus years of his life running away from the genocide.
So your family leaves Rwanda, their home country. They're living in Uganda. You spent your first 26 years
In
kind of
Uganda.
moving around in Uganda. And then in April of 94, we see that the genocide begins in Rwanda, but you're in Uganda. So a couple of questions I want to know about that. How did you guys hear about what was happening in those specific months? And what did you guys do about it?
Now, let me tell you, our ears were on the ground in Rwanda for years. We're listening. We had families that stayed and families that were killed during the genocide. So our ears were on the ground. And more than that, I lived on the lakeside, Lake Victoria. And there's a river that connects all the way from Rwanda to Uganda. And dead bodies were arriving from Rwanda to Uganda on the river through the lake. So it was vivid, it was visible, it was painful. We were waiting because we had friends on the front line dying, trying to rescue the country from the genocide. Our hearts and our prayers were so involved even during the 100 days of the genocide against the Tutsi people, hoping that our families would survive.
Hoping that your families would survive. Now,
and unfortunately, many of them didn't survive. My uncle didn't survive. His wife didn't survive. His children didn't.
Now, I know you've been in Rwanda for a long time now.
Yeah.
You went back after the genocide. You kind of followed the footsteps of your father. I would love if you would tell us that.
Wow, 95. My dad, I'll back off a little bit. My dad was on the forefront of making sure people are rescued. And in 1994, before even the genocide ended, he returned to Rwanda.
While it was still happening?
Yes.
Wow.
Because he was on the forefront of rescuing and getting involved in the country. 1995, I stepped into Rwanda. And I remember arriving at the border and entering the country. And everywhere you would see military people that had just delivered the country from the genocide. But also on the side, you would see the United Nations military, which had failed the people in the country. They just could not fight. And you would see a nation covered with a military presence, guns, dark, painful, broken doors, broken homes, broken nation, and a very big orphanage crisis. So basically, public schools were orphanages filled with children who couldn't be identified or children whose families had been killed, but also exoduses of refugees returning to Rwanda. It was a hard place. It was a darker place. It was not the place you want to be and to go back to.
What took you back?
What took me back, first of all, I wanted to see for myself what had happened. But I also had heard that there was a sense of opportunity for me to enter the country and I would not be killed for the first time. So I stepped in the country in search for my father. And fortunately, I was able to meet my father, my dad. He's a hero. He's now gone to be with the Lord, but he's a hero. He was there. So I went there and met him, spent time with him. Fortunately, at that time, I was a Christian. I'd come to Jesus. I was a younger pastor. And at that moment, it's like God started calling me in the middle of this darker place.
Yeah.
It's as if God put me on a bus, on a road to Rwanda to go call me to serve him in that environment.
That's beautiful that he did that. And you went into Rwanda, you found your dad. Now you've said several times, it was a very dark place. Can you explain that a little bit for us? Because I have been to Rwanda in the past few years. I was there in early 2020, and it doesn't feel like a dark place to me when I was there. And I know that we're 30 years removed.
Yep.
So there's a difference. What was it like then, right after the genocide, when you went back? Maybe even, Charles, if you could expand on what was it like on a spiritual level in the country?
Okay. Obviously, it was physically dark, but more than that, there was a lot of fear everywhere. People were afraid of each other. We used to go home and lock ourselves inside the homes at 6 o'clock. And after 6, no one wants to walk out.
Because they're afraid.
Because they're afraid for their life. You know, we had seen dead bodies. I'm talking about a moment when dead bodies were still everywhere, not yet buried. A number of them buried in mass graves. Right. So the stinking of human bodies was all over the country. It was dark. It's a terrible thing for human beings not to be buried and be stinking everywhere. It was fearful. It was dark. People were afraid for their lives. People were also afraid that this could happen again.
For sure.
Spiritually, it's like the entire heavens were closed over the nation. There is no breakthrough. Everyone is wondering, where is God in this environment? There was a real crisis of faith in the hearts of people. And it was hard. It was dark. It was, we are fearful for our lives that you could be killed.
Yeah. You've been pastoring there for a while, and I said that I was there in 2020, and I was telling a friend before I went, I had read some stuff about the genocide, and I was, familiar with it as much as I could be. And when I told her I'm flying to Rwanda, and what I expected, Pastor Charles, was to see darkness and despair and hopelessness. But what I found in your country was hope and happiness and joy and beauty. And so I want to hear from you, how does a country go from literally brothers killing neighbors, families torn apart, complete fear, locking yourself in your room and your house? How does a country get from there to where you are today?
Wow. I've lived through the process. I want to say, first of all, it's a miracle. It's totally a miracle from God. For both the believers and non-believers in Rwanda, we can all say that our nation is a miracle. Yeah. How do we go from point A to point B? I remember very early, I would go around the country preaching. We put up the first big crusades and events in a stadium, preaching the gospel. But around that time, I used to see many Christians, especially survivors, and those who had come back from refugee camps, praying. And a lot of prayers were going on all over the nation in different locations. Survivors. And I call them survivors on a number of fronts. Survivors from the genocide, survivors from being refugees, but also survivors from their crisis of faith. Yeah. That they had the energy once again to believe God, that out of this bad experience, God can give us something good.
Yeah.
And I really believe out of that, God started working into the nation through the prayers of the saints and intercessors. Up to this day, Rwanda is full of intercessors. There are men and women everywhere all the time praying for the country. So first of all, I want to really accredit the miracle in Rwanda, first and foremost, to men and women that pray and pray for the nation. And then God started moving in the prisons. Because remember, nearly 150,000 men were in prison for having committed the genocide. And the prisons were flooded with murderers. And God used the prison fellowship to start preaching the gospel in the prisons. And God started moving in the hearts of the perpetrators of the genocide to repent, to seek forgiveness. And in the middle of that, God worked in the heart of our president. Again, his prayers into good leadership. And we had a forgiveness moment where some of them would actually be forgiven and released from the prison to go back into the communities and ask for forgiveness in the communities where they committed the genocide.
I want to make sure no one misses this, because I remember you told me this, and this blows my mind, that we have men in prison who had murdered people in their community, people that they knew, people that they went to school with, people that the day before they would have shared a meal with. They're in prison, and then the president starts creating these moments, and they start following Jesus in prisons, and they are brought out of the prison into the community to sit across from people who they had murdered their family members. And what went on between those two people?
I remember going to one of them. And basically we call them gachacha meetings.
Gachacha?
Gachacha. And the gachacha means a piece of lawn, piece of grass, where the community would come and sit down on stools and talk about issues in the community. So it was a traditional thing. Traditionally, people would gather to talk about issues in the community. So this time, the men were released. They were brought to gachacha meetings. And the victims, the survivors, would come to the meetings to listen to them, seeking forgiveness, asking them to forgive them for what they did to the families, because they knew each other. They were neighbors. They went to school together. But something happened upon the nation. It was a demonic attack upon the nation. And they would tell their story, how their lives have changed through the prison experience, and how they've had the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the light of God has come into their hearts. And now they realize that what they did was evil and wrong, and they are seeking forgiveness in the community, and they are willing to pay any restitution required for them to be able to be forgiven.
Wow. And then did you see the survivors, the victims, did they extend forgiveness towards them?
Now, it's not that easy.
Well, I would imagine.
But the beauty is that this would not happen in one day.
That's,
or 2 days. It's a continuous dialogue. Unfortunately, as a Christian, I believe through the prayers of the saints, God continued to work in the hearts of the government and leaders and the community to create these kind of programs where they would bring the people again and again and again. Gradually, the hearts of the victims would begin to melt. They would start to ask questions like, you killed my father. I haven't been able to see his body. Where is the body? And then the perpetrators of the genocide would go into the community and show them where the body was laid or buried. And they started going from one community to another community to show us where the dead bodies are. Because remember, some people were thrown into swamps, some people were thrown into pits, and now you begin to see this communication, which doesn't really begin, relationships, which don't begin on a good ground, but show me where my family is. You are asking me to forgive you, yes. But where is my family? Where is my father? Where is my wife? Where is he buried? And gradually, a community relationship started coming back. And gradually, people accepted and said, I forgive you. And as a result, we have reconciliational communities where you're going to find the perpetrator of the genocide and the victim living together. They are neighbors. And because the survivors don't have family and the perpetrators have family, they come in and help them grow crops, help them build their houses, build those bridges. And restore the community.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
As I'm listening to you talk about it, it does sound like a miracle. And, it makes me think, I have visited memorial sites in your country that have been so beautifully done to really show respect to all of the victims. But it also shows really the tragedy of what happened in your country. And it's got me thinking, like, we see in this world, like, as followers of Jesus, like, the Christ obviously has forgiven us for the most, and he asks us to look like him and forgive those around us. But like you said so beautifully, it's not that easy and it's hard. But your country today, although you do show respect for the victims, you do remember and have memorial for what happens. If you guys function, like you said, as family, especially as believers who may have family on either side, you're functioning as believers. When you think about that, Charles, how do you point that to even us in our regular day life of following Jesus? You've seen reconciliation change an entire country. There are some people who reconciliation feels like the furthest thing they could ever imagine giving someone. How have you seen really God move through reconciliation?
Now, we have to remember as Christians that we can't have reconciliation without the cross. We can't have reconciliation without Jesus. And Jesus on the cross, he actually reconciled us. He broke down the hatred between the two and he brought us together. I want to say that what I see in Rwanda is a work of Jesus. Jesus working in the lives of the people in the nation, in the church, and even outside the church, because this reconciliation has affected not only the church, but even the entire community. And it's again a miracle. It's not something we can take easily. It is something that's not ended. The reconciliation process is not ended. We continue to see this happening every year, every day, as generations change. Right. I mean, it's now nearly 30 years, and the new generation of younger people is much farther away. My daddy was that far away. I mean, since 1959, it was hard for him to forgive. He didn't have a relationship with Jesus. He was a church goer, but not deeply involved with Jesus. I was a Jesus believer, Jesus follower, and Jesus broke my heart and brought me near to the cross to be able to offer forgiveness. The second generation is much further away from all of us. So it's the work of God's grace. It is the cross. It is Jesus Christ. It's the good shepherd working in our lives to shepherd us through our crisis moment. So when you look at what happened in Rwanda, it is the good shepherd shepherding an entire nation through the crisis, and once again bringing us together to be one person. to be one nation.
It's really, really beautiful. And one thing that you have mentioned to me before in the past, and I don't want to mess it up, but you said something to me before about how you guys try not to like rehearse the pain. Can you talk about even walking forward in reconciliation, acknowledging the pain of what happened, the realities of it, but yet not staying there?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
And I think you can hear that in my voice. Trying to be careful, not to go back in the pain, trying to be careful, not again to attack other people I've forgiven, but to have love for them and compassion for them and care for them, and to fix my language and the way I use my words. And that's a continuous journey, because weaker people can't be mean when they have pain. You wanna bring out that pain in a mean way. So I try to be careful not to go back there and be mean in that environment, not to rehearse the pain, not to do what was done to me, but to forgive my enemies, for us to forgive our enemies, so that we can put a stop to generations of hatred, to generations of pain. Someone has to put a stop to it. It's like a Jesus carrying the pain and the sins of the entire world in his own body, so that he can stop the power of sin in our lives. We are learning from Jesus and trying to take on the pain of the past and say it stops here. It's not going on to the next generation. I want my children, I want my friends, I want this generation to be different.
Yeah. It almost feels like where you guys have gone in 30 years, rehearsing the pain would have stayed. We would have kept you all in 1994 for years and years and years, right?
Yes.
How would you have gotten out of it? It would have just been impossible. You talk about you have to change your language and change the way you think so you don't go back into those feelings. You even did that earlier to me when I brought up the two ethnic groups. You even said, well, I'm not going to say that. So what parts of that have even changed within your country? Because previous to 94, or previous to 59, do you guys still consider there to be two ethnic groups in Rwanda?
No, not anymore.
Okay.
In fact, it changed first of all in our language. But reconciliation gets better when it gets on institutional levels.
Okay.
It's like a revival. You can have individual revival, but till revival starts to affect institutions, you don't see the change and the transformation you want to see. So what actually happened, our government abolished IDs. We had IDs that would say you are Hutu, you are Tutsi, you are Twa. And during the genocide, they would actually look at your ID and determine your ethnic background. Because remember, all of us are black.
Yes.
And all of us kind of look the same and share the same language. So basically, they would look at the ID and determine your ethnicity.
And determine whether you would live or die.
Determine whether you should live or die.
Wow.
And as a result, the government abolished that. So now when you look at every Rwandan ID, everyone is Rwandan. No Hutu, no Tutsi, no Twa. Everyone is Rwandan, and it's on the national level.
Wow.
And on the level to the extent that when you are interviewing for a job, you don't ask. You receive a Rwandan. When you are interviewing for someone to come into a school, a university, or college, you don't ask someone is Rwandan.
Because it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter anymore. Anyway, we're all created in the image of God, distorted and destroyed by different views of sin and language And I'm talking about language that is divisive. To take you back even before the genocide, all the way from 1959 to 94, we had language like Tutsi people are grasshoppers, which actually mean you can stamp on them. Tutsi people are a snake. Therefore, they are dangerous. When you find them, you kill them. The language like Tutsi people have a tail. They're an animal. They can hurt you. So the whole language of dehumanizing people, all that was abolished and taken away, because most of the times before someone actually hurts another person in a big way, they dehumanize them. So they bring them to nothing, and therefore they can kill them. So that entire language has been taken away. It's a new country, new rules. We now have a lot of lighting. Our streets are lighted, so even the physical darkness is gone. It's a new city. There's no fear anymore. I drive around the city at midnight,
and you're fine.
And I have no fear. I can walk anywhere and have no fear. You've been to Rwanda.
Yes.
It's the safest nation on the continent of Africa.
Yes.
It's the safest place, very clean.
Very clean.
We've cleaned all the broken buildings.
Yeah.
We've buried our dead. We've had all these burials for nearly 30 years. All that is covered, and we have a new country, and we thank God for our new country.
You know, when you were talking about language, and you really set the stage for, because the question that everyone has that didn't live through this and doesn't understand what would have been going on in your country for more than 90 days, for 50 years, for 100 years, the question often is like, how does something like that actually happen? Like, it just seems so foreign. And you set it up by saying that for years, it was allowed to look at a group of people as less than another group of people.
Yes.
And Charles, we see this happening all around the world still continuously today. As you watch what's happening in our world, what's happening in other countries, where whether it's said or not, some people group, ethnicities are viewed as less than others. What is your fear as you watch that?
You know, I fear that what happened in Rwanda can happen in those environments. I fear for those communities. I fear for those people. And I wish we can help each other to tame our tongue and be very careful about what we say about other people, especially that language which dehumanizes other people, make the entire race evil, the entire ethnic group evil, the entire community evil. It's dangerous. I'm afraid. I mean, it's I've had it in other places, and every time I do, some kind of triggers go on in my life. It actually triggers my trauma.
I'm sure.
When I walk through those kind of experiences again.
I'm sure. As you look back on all that God's done in your own personal life and the beautiful work that you guys have done with your church and with the schools, and you look back and you see what your family went through, what your father, what your grandparents, you lost family members, and very traumatic what you have lived through in your country. As you look back on that as a person of faith, a person who believes in the work of Jesus and believes in the hand of God, what is your encouragement to someone who may not be living through a genocide, obviously, but really is saying, God, I don't know how I got through that, and I don't know how to forgive, and I don't know how to reconcile. You've seen a miracle in your country, and yet so often in our individual lives, we have a really hard time stepping into forgiveness and a really hard time stepping into reconciliation. I would assume that you would say it's worth it to walk through that. But what is your encouragement for that woman who might be walking through something super difficult?
I don't know how I've gone through this. I mean, I can flash back all the way when I was 12 years of age, living in a community with no grandparents, with no auntie, with no family member, but just my mom and my dad and my siblings trying to find a way to survive. I didn't even know that I'll be alive by today. It's a miracle for me to be 56. It's a miracle. I can't even imagine it. But through all this, we've experienced the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the grace of God through all this pain. My comfort to someone who is out there, I would say, the grace of God is sufficient. There are things that may not go away in your life because we live in a broken world and we accept that. But once Jesus is in your life, he actually gives you grace. I came to Jesus when I was 17. My life changed at 17, at 18. My life before Jesus was terrible, was hard. I think because of my pain, I was even beginning to get into addictions like alcohol at 16, at 17. I met Jesus. Jesus changed my life. He gave me grace to bear the pain even when I could not see change soon, till we started seeing the change. And now we are celebrating what Christ has done. Encourage you, hold on, don't give up. The grace of God is sufficient in your circumstances. Jesus will help you. And finally, I really believe that God brings change. It may delay, but it will come. So I encourage you not to lose hope. Not to lose hope, to keep your hope on. And I think that's what Jesus gave me at 17, 18. Jesus gave me hope, even in my circumstances. Living in Uganda, my life started shining. I got the guts to go back to school and make relationships and go to church and have friends till finally I've seen this complete change in the nation of Rwanda and in my own life. So grace, the grace of God is sufficient. Don't lose hope. Keep hoping and God will help you through.
Well, Charles, you have been an excellent representation of how God can do that in a person's life and in a country. And I just want to say thank you for talking about this. I cannot imagine that it will ever be easy before you go meet Jesus to talk about this. And so thank you for allowing us to hear the story. And it's an honor to know you. And it's an honor to hear how God has worked in Rwanda. Thank you.
Thank you. It's going to be easy in heaven.
That's right.
To talk about these kind of things.
No tears.
Because there'll be no tears, no pain, complete peace. Somehow God is going to completely transform us. Meanwhile, it's a process.
That's right. Thank you so much, Charles.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.